If you want to be able to land your first job in cybersecurity in today's job market, you must stand out. And there's no better way to do this than to have a commercial grade cybersecurity report on hand to show to the hiring managers. My name is Ryan from Elevate Cyber, and I am a cybersecurity professional with over a decade of experience and have spent the last 4 years mentoring students, helping them break into cybersecurity. And in this video, I am going to actually walk you through a cybersecurity pen test report from one of my students and highlight all the key points that you need to know to develop a professional grade pen test report. And also, if you'd like to grab a solid report template, you can get that for free down in the description section below. And one of the things that I say on this channel all the time, do not take my word for this stuff. I'm gonna show you proof right now on the screen of one of my students that was able to leverage the commercial pen test report in order to get a full-on job in cybersecurity right away without having to go into help desk first or IT or any of the standard things like that people believe is like the only path. Because when you have something like this that can help you stand out, and you can, as he says in the screenshot here, can wow the hiring manager, that is how you are able to really accelerate this process. And so you can see here, this was for a pen testing role that involved some other areas as well. Got to dip his toes in the water of some SOC analyst stuff, but it was primarily an offensive security role where he was doing DAST and SAST and some manual pen testing as well. Now let's segue over to another student of mine that has written a report that we're going to break down hands-on on this call so you can see my thought process and how I would critique it, because spoiler alert here, there are some room for improvement in the report that we're going to take a look at here, and I'll show you that would separate this from a commercial grade pen test report. All right, and let's start it off with the cover page. This is something that you always want to have at the front of your report. Now, if you're doing this for a company, the nice thing is they usually provide the pen test report template. If you're trying to use this as a way to break into the field, then there's a number of templates out there you can use. Like I said, I provide one in the description down below, but that's by far not the only valid template. The thing that's tricky about cybersecurity and pen test reports and reports in general is there is no one standard format. There's many, and it kind of depends on where you work, which format they prefer. But if you include all the key points that I'm going to go over with you here, you can be sure that whatever template you're using is going to be up to snuff, or you're going to be able to tweak it to make sure that it has everything required. So first thing that everyone's going to see is this cover page here. Now, there's a few guidelines here and a few things that I would honestly tweak from my students' report here. I would refrain from using any crazy fonts, and I would kind of describe this as a crazy font here. It really kind of cheapens the report. You do want to be very boring and dry when it comes to your font choice in these reports. And by the way, in terms of what you can write this with, there's so many different ways. One of the most standard ones is just to use Microsoft Word, but you can also use Markdown with Obsidian or whatever you prefer. So you can use a number of things. If you don't know, just use Word. I would say it's like one of the most straightforward ways to do it if you're not too familiar with some of the other tools and things that are out there. There's also platforms like Plextrack where you can have it generate reports for you. But regardless, make sure that you're using very standard fonts, like maybe Times New Roman or something of that nature with the font. Otherwise, it cheapens the quality of it. So that's the first thing that I would call out with this one. The next thing is you want to have a bunch of the boilerplate stuff. And if you're using the template that I'm providing, it's going to cover you here with all this stuff. Although there are things that you're going to want to plug in and switch out for your assessment. So he came up with this fictitious company, Bifrost Security, for this one. Whatever company you're testing or whatever, just make sure that you're updating the boilerplate text to reflect that. But yeah, you want a confidentiality statement, disclaimer, all this stuff, and then you can put the contact information and things like that. And then also you want to have like your assessment overview and say like what was a summary of like we call it the executive summary. What's the high level of the report? Guideline for reporting. Top to the, you want to go from least technical down to most technical, because, and here is where it's a lot different than what a lot of people realize, and this is the reason partially that most reports out there are complete rubbish. People do them as walkthroughs. With a walkthrough, you know, it's only for other hackers, that's the intended audience, but for an actual pen test report, there are multiple audience members. You have other hackers that might need to validate those findings, but you also have executives that need to understand what was the outcome of the test and why should they care? And then you have the technical people in charge of fixing the issue that need to know, okay, what was the finding? What do I need to do to fix it? So we need to speak to all these people. And we want to do it so that the executives have all that information up top, where it's not very technical and there's no real jargon being used. And then as we go down the document, we get more into the nitty-gritty details, the technical details that those tech people are going to need. So that's why you notice up here, with some exceptions, there's for the most part, it's very, it's more standard language and things like that. And then you want to have your scoping where you're calling out, hey, this is the assets that were tested. If it's a network assessment like this one, you'll have like a subnet that was in scope. If it's a web pen test, maybe you have like some like the base URL and things like that was in scope for the testing. Kind of depends on what the scope is. And you can also say what's out of scope. And again, you don't want to be using this kind of font. So that was one of the things that I told my student, that like, hey, we need to switch out this font for something more standard. I just wanted to make that clear once again. Yeah, here's the executive summary that I was talking about, where we're talking about, a summary of what all is happening. And then we get down into the nitty gritty details as we go down below, but then we can also summarize the strengths and weaknesses as well. So we have all of that key information at the top of the document, easily accessible. Now, here is a mistake. I guess in this case, something went wrong with like when he was plugging in the numbers, he forgot to update something. So you can see here that the count is off. And also, if you have any word like that, you want to try to that so everything's looking clean, like one line. So, it looks like not to the eye. I think if he switches out the font, it'll probably solve that issue. But you want to make sure that the count is accurate, obviously. So in this case, it would be 3 criticals and 2 highs. And then also, the way that he named the findings needs a lot of work. So I would say the rule of thumb on finding names is that you should be able to read it and gain an understanding of what was the issue. You shouldn't have to dig any deeper to have an understanding of what is the issue that needs to be fixed. So I recommended him to change out all of these findings because they're super wordy, right? I mean, these are not really names. These are like whole sentences, right? And they contain a lot of jargon and things like that. Also, inconsistencies. We have this one starting with a lowercase s, whereas before that, and I'll zoom in a little bit here, before that, everything was uppercase. And then you just have, so you want to be consistent with whatever format you're doing, for one thing. But also when it comes, going back to the naming of the findings, it needs to be concise and it needs to be clear. And this was neither of that. So if we just look at some of these, like binary run as super user does not drop elevated privileges, root user obtained. So this is like explaining the issue and the impact, like the outcome of it. This is like a really long wordy thing. It's not a finding name. So we would want to think about, okay, what is the security issue here? For one thing, reading this, I don't even know what binary was affected. I don't even know the affected component. I would have to go and dig into this finding to tell you what we should name it, to be honest. But let's see if we can find one that's a little more clear that I could tell you what, just as an example here. So unauthorized SMB login enabled access to a root shell via misconfigure logon command. So I remember from this lab specifically, it was a vulnerable version of Samba, of the Samba server being used that was vulnerable to this, what we call the user map script injection or something like that. And basically, there was a CVE. This was a known vulnerability that led to remote code execution. Now, I know that's a lot of jargon. If you're new, you're probably like, what the hell did you just say, right? Basically, what you need to know is when it comes to security issues on third-party software, meaning someone created the software that a bunch of people are using, right? It wasn't developed internally by that team. It was developed by some other team, and like anyone can use it. An example of this is Microsoft Windows, right? That's a third-party software developed by Microsoft, and you and I can use it, all right? We can use Windows. If it comes to software like that, and there's a known security issue, it will have what's called a CVE number associated with it. This is like a unique identifier of the security issue that was probably eventually patched, right? Because if it's a well-known product like that, they're going to fix the security issue so people keep using their products, right? So in this case, with the Samba server thing, it would have a CVE. I would just label it as the CVE number, right? Because then it's very clear and straightforward on what it is, because anyone can look up that CVE number and they can say, oh, okay, this is the issue here. And in recommendation, I would tell them, hey, you need to upgrade to either the latest version or whichever version it was fixed in. Simple Google search there, and you can find that information. If we just play out one more of these, just to drive it home, make it extra clear, server accessible via default credentials with potential for command line access, I would say default credentials in use or something like that. But I would also make it clear what is the affected component, meaning, okay, default credentials where? I think this one was on the Apache Tomcat. So I would say Tomcat default credentials in use, something like that, where it's very concise and it's very clear, straightforward. I don't have to do any additional digging to know what the security issue is. So hopefully that sheds some light on my mindset, my thought process around that. That is what I would apply to all of these. And of course, with the recommendation, make sure it's really clear and accurate on what they need to do to fix the issue, essentially. And then we go down into the findings section. This is where the nitty-gritty technical details are going to come into play for each one of these issues. Now, one thing that I glossed over here that he did right is you want to order this from most critical to least critical. You don't want to put in random orders. You don't want to, the key mistake is a lot of people just will list it in the order that they actually did it on their, or found it in their pen test. You don't want to do this. You want to remember most critical to least critical. That's why he presented in that order, and whatever order you list it in here in the summary of the findings, that's the order you need to present it down here in the findings section. Now he has the CVSS scoring with the vector string. This will tell us exactly why he rated it, what he rated it. I would add to this though, the actual score, because if you plug this into the CVSS calculator, it will generate a score. It will generate a number. I would recommend to show that number for sure, so we know not only is it a critical, but is it a 9.0 critical, a 10 critical? How critical is it really? So I would say you really want to add that for sure. But at least we have the vector string, so we could go and determine that by Googling CVSS calculator and then copying this, putting it in the URL bar. This score, essentially, if you're not familiar with this, it's a overall score of the criticality of the vulnerability in terms of the impact and everything like that. In the description section, it's a description of the security issue. Now, here is another area where he went wrong. So he was talking about, I guess, the steps that he took to find it and exploit it or something like that. This is not what you want. You want to make sure that you are explaining it's the description of the security issue. In this finding section, it's all about the vulnerability. It's all about the security issue, not so much about the exploits or what you did as an attacker. It's only focused on the vulnerability, on the security issue. I just want to make that overwhelmingly clear because this is a mistake that I very often see in these reports. So that was the point of feedback that I gave him. I said, hey, we want to talk about, in this case, what is the issue at hand here? And then down here is where you would have your likelihood and impact, which he does have here, and I think he did a pretty good job of that here. This is what I'm looking for in terms of likelihood and impact, I would say. Now, if we scroll down a little bit more, here's some optional sections you don't absolutely need, but you can say, what was the affected component? What IP was this on? That's what I would add in this case, right? Because he gave a subnet as a scope. So instead of saying all, well, if this was on all servers, then yeah, you could say all. But if it was on a specific server within that subnet, we'd want to call that out here. This is not really an optional category, actually, because they need to know where is this located, the thing they need to fix. But what is optional is the tools used. So that can maybe be useful at a glance for other testers that might want to revalidate that and see what you use. But it's not really critical or anything. References you definitely need, but here is where I would make a bit of a critique on this as well. The references should be references on how to fix the issue, not on how to hack it. Because remember, target audience. This section is for executives and technical people in charge of fixing the issue. They need to know what is the issue, right? So the references should be, if you think about someone in this case, it's a network assessment. So if you think about a network engineer or a sysadmin or something, they need to know how can I secure the server, not how can I hack my own server. So providing hacking resources is not going to be too helpful here. So I would not have included this. But a vulnerability announcement, I would have to dive in to see exactly what he linked here, but that could potentially be useful for them. Now, the evidence section is where you go and show your reproduction steps, because if you think about the audience and how this is all going to play together, let's say they go and they fix one of these issues, then you're going to need to confirm, or someone on your team, even more likely, is going to need to confirm that it was in fact fixed. And so they're going to need to, in many companies, in many cases, they're going to have to submit a ticket for a retest. And this retest might not be picked up by you, depending on the bandwidth. If you guys have ticket queue managers, maybe they assign that to someone else on your team, not you necessarily. So this is why this section is so important. Or maybe they just take a super long time to fix it. You're not even at the company, or the person that originally did the test is not even at the company anymore. Definitely you want to see, okay, well, we don't want to duplicate work. We don't want to make this take longer than necessary. We want to have all the information here. So this section is really helpful for other pen testers to see, okay, here's how this was validated in the past. What steps do I need to take to validate this quickly, right? Because even if you're a super elite hacker and you know how to do it, I mean, there's no benefit in figuring it out all over again. Like, that doesn't help the company. They'd rather you do it quickly so you can get into the next test and provide more value for the company. So that's why we have this evidence section here. I like to describe it as if you think of an instruction manual at IKEA, right? Let's say you want to build a table, you buy a table at IKEA, you have the instruction manual, you got to build it yourself. At a minimum, you would hope that there would be some screenshots, right? There'd be some diagrams, some pictures to show like what components to connect together in what order. Now, you can have that, or you can also have that accompanied by text, right? Like a short description of what to do and then a picture showing it. That's ideal, right? But in the absence of everything, as long as you have like the pictures, then you can at least maybe piece it together. But my recommendation is to have both. So say, do this, do this, do this, get this result, screenshot. Or do this, screenshot, do this, screenshot, get this result, screenshot, right? Just have it really clear and like really step by step. Now, in going back to the IKEA example, right? When you're building a table, you don't care about the reason that they decided to put the screw holes 9 millimeters apart because it's the best for the tension distribution across the surface area of the table. And through their testing, they determined that that was the ideal proportions and that they decided to weigh the material, many kilograms because that was the best density. No, you don't care about any of that, right? Like, you could not care less as the person building the table. You just need to know, like, okay, how do I build the damn table? That's all you need. So this is, the reason I mentioned this is a key point that I see a lot of people get wrong, is they will explain like all of the, like the reasoning behind running all these commands and all this enumeration that is not related to, actually exploiting the vulnerability. Because we just want to strip it down to bare bones. What do I need to do to reproduce the exploit? Okay. We don't need to include a bunch of background information of our methodology and how we found it and stuff. Now, for your own portfolio, if you're doing a hacking walkthrough, yeah, show your methodology, if it's a blog post or something. But for a pen test report where the target audience is not like hiring managers trying to see like how great of a hacker you are, if you treat this like a real pen test, okay? This is the target audience. Now, if you want to showcase this to a hiring manager, your methodology and all this stuff, cool, do that in a walkthrough. Send them a walkthrough as well, and they can see that there. But if you want it to be a commercial grade pen test report like we're talking about in this video, this is the only information that you want to include. So what I recommended for him to do is just add a little bit more information on what to do written out, and then accompany that with the screenshot. I know he has the figure down here below, which is better than nothing, but I would add a little bit more detail here. But yeah, for the remediation, you can tell them like how to fix it essentially. So yep, that looks good to me. And then he has some references and stuff for them. Instead of remediation links, I would just call it references. But he's kind of duplicating work here because he already had that up here. Where was it? Up here in the references. So I would just only have that one. So you could probably get rid of this. But that's pretty much what I would say for each and every one. And again, consistency is key. This report is being cheapened by the fact that we're seeing all kinds of crazy different fonts. Like, look at this font. Compare that to what we saw at the top up here, like this, right? He's using all different kinds of fonts. It's kind of all over the place. On here, there was no numbers. Now all of a sudden we're putting numbers before the stuff. So consistency is key. And also, I don't know how much copy and pasting he did. It looks like quite a bit. That can throw off your formatting as well. So I'm not saying don't ask ChatGPT and stuff. There's a time and place for that. It can be useful. But just if you're going to do that, make sure that you're fixing the formatting and things like that. But I like here on the evidence section on this one, you see he's annotating his screenshots. He has arrows. He's directing our attention where to look. So it's really solid here. Again, I think could add a little bit more text just saying what to do. But yeah, this is pretty solid. I'm pretty nitpicking at that point. This one is pretty good here. But in general, yeah, he needs to fix the description sections a bit and things like that. But hopefully this gives you a solid idea of what to look for when you put together a pen test report. If you have questions, drop them down in the comments below. But if you'd like this process of cybersecurity, go down below to the description and book a call, and we'll be talking soon.